start our meeting. Please take the roll.
Mr. Picard? Mr. White? Mr. Waters?
Here.
Ms. Wagner?
Here.
Mr. Shearer?
Here.
Mr. Polachek?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a quorum. We move right to the first item, and that is to approve the minutes. The minutes were mailed out, and if there are no questions about the minutes or any suggested changes, I would move to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and approved to minutes. Let's just do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Then we move on to questions and public comment. Is anyone here for public comment?
I noticed that Mr. White is on the online, just to recognize that for the minutes.
Mr. White, can you hear us?
Aaron, are you able to respond?
I'm going to try sending him a chat and see if he can respond that way.
Okay, thank you. So anyone else here for public comment? Not seeing anybody. Let's move on to the next item. And that is, I believe, our report from Randy. Correct?
Thank you, Mr. Polachek. If you could pull the slide presentation up, please.
Yep.
So we have had a very busy last 4 or 5 weeks. We'll start with the electric department. They had completed some very serious upgrades on our primary lines along College Avenue. And this was a rather delicate undertaking at Ferry and College, where we needed to transfer the existing 25 kV lines onto a new utility pole. And to do this, we utilized 4 machines, and one was to hold the lines in place, so we never actually cut the power off during this operation. Slide. And slide. And while we were doing this, we had a full closure on that intersection. We had pre-planned this for about 2 weeks, and then we just diverted traffic in 2 different ways. North and southbound went 2 different directions. And we had no incidents with that, and I was glad that we had no safety incidents either. Everything went very smoothly, very methodically. Slide. Moving to street department, they've been very busy. They've been very understaffed as well. Currently, we are starting interviews tomorrow for a street operator. We are actually short 2 of them. In the past 4 weeks, because we were without a foreman with the retirement of Mr. Yandere, and in that time I was filling in as much as I could as foreman, just trying to handle operations, but we had moved up one of our operators. His name's Ryan Krieger. We moved him to interim foreman, and he will hold that position until January 1st, when we will make a decision then on what we're going to do next with the foreman position. But with that move, we now have 3 operators working in the field. We look to hire 1 and maybe 2. We'll see. Slide. So the big operation that went on was the chip sealing. Dwayne did an excellent job in preparing for this, getting the contract ready, selecting a contractor, and then we had everything mapped out, and then we were out with no parking signs 3 to 2 days in advance. We had everything marked in paint for the contractor when they arrived, so there was no questions on what was getting chip sealed and what wasn't. Slide. This is the emulsion truck. It's back in the 90s, we just called it tar, but now it's called emulsion. It sounds more engineering. We lay this down first and slide. And slide. And then the chip seal truck follows right behind it. We had an excellent 3 days of weather for this application. When it's hot out, this is just perfect. It allows the chips, the 3/8 inch chips typically, to embed into the emulsion. Slide. And as you can see, the truck here, the spreader, is laying down the chips in front of it and then drives over it, and then they roll that. Slide. We had everything clearly marked with all the work ahead signs. We had our message boards out a week in advance, and we had a notice on our website and our Facebook site. Plus, the crew put out letters to the impacted residents. There was about 130. The letters went out into their mailboxes, forewarning those that were directly impacted. Slide. This is the finished product. This is CP Avenue looking south. And basically this is a really good prolonging of our road. We make decisions at the time whether this road is going to benefit from another 10 years or so.
Typically a 7-year application on chip seal.
Or is it not worth applying the chip seal and instead start scheduling a rebuild? But in most cases, this is a very economical solution for cities like Lake Mills. Slide. The street department is also working hard. We did the first phase of our sidewalk replacements. All of our replacements in the first phase were along Lake Street, and that's where these following pictures were all taken. Slide. And slide. 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 This is the end product along Lake Street. Slide. And this is in front of the Dollar General. Slide. Wastewater Department, they have filled in on a couple of remediations we had to do. Slide. One was a trench repair we had on the other side of the lake. There was a water main break, a sewer main break. And the break was repaired, but the trench backfill was done improperly, so we had a lot of movement. So Bill and his crew took the lead on this. We ended up having a contractor bring the machine out. They pulled all the poor material out, all the loose material. Slide. Going down to the sewer main. Slide. And then we started backfilling it with a well-graded crushed stone with fines. And you do this in smaller lifts and compact these lifts. Normally, we'll put down about a loose lift of 9 inches, compact it down to around 8, 7 inches, and then the stone interlocks and it holds really firm. Slide. And that was the end product there. Slide. Just today, I snapped this just on while I was en route. They had the vac truck out on Lake Street as well. This is a crew doing maintenance on our manholes in our collection system. You will get buildup of material at times in the various manholes. And so if you're dutiful about this, it's easy to maintain the flow as long as you're staying on top of vacuuming out the small compilations. Slide. Sorry. Slide. Then we had a sinkhole develop in front of the Legion. You'll see the manhole there. I don't have my laser pointer with me, I'm sorry, but there is the manhole there on the right side of the picture. Dwayne and I went, when this was reported to us, we visited it. We were looking inside the manhole and realized there was a gap from the existing storm pipe into the manhole, and this is where we think the infiltration was happening. And it did start to pull the soil into the manhole. So the first part of this was opening up the manhole. The sanitary crew took the lead on this as well. And they cleaned out the manhole, vacked it out, and then filled in the gaps with mortar. And then we opened up the hole in the next part of this project. It ended up being a big excavation because much of the trench was collapsing at times. But eventually we got to a firm wall in the trench. We packed in stone at the base of the pipe. Slide. And then we poured slurry for our backfill. And we believe this problem's solved now. And that'll be the next public works director's problem when it sinks again, if ever. Slide. Water Department, I call this out. They had a very successful summer so far on meter changeouts. They were busy putting out letters, trying to get cooperation from residents to change out our old meters to our new digital reading meters. Slide. And this is Devon. Every meter that we take out, all the old ones, we test every single one to make sure that they were operating properly, so there's no problems with any readings. And Devon's he was packed away in there, doing nothing but testing on our test bench. Slide. And that is our water test bench there. And he records the beginning data and the end data after testing. Slide. And this has been a big success. I'm very proud of the department right now. I'm very glad for the progress they've made on getting our meters changed out. Once we can get to 100%, which is going to take a while longer, but we're well on our way now. We're really making progress on getting all of our digital meters in. Slide. Now just one more picture to give you an idea how much progress they've been making. Slide. Brookstone Phase 8, the grading part of it is done. Slide. Slide. And then, so they came in and put in the hot mix asphalt. These trucks come in typically around 280 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Slide. With their mix. Then the machine pulls up behind the truck, locks onto the rear tires, the rear axle, and then they start spreading the mix. Slide. Slide. And we pay attention. It's very important that we monitor the temperature. For me personally, I believe Dwayne's in agreement. We don't want to mix anything cooler than 250 degrees. It needs to be 250 or higher. And then it gives a good intermix. I mean, the oil, the petroleum-based oil, basically, is able to mix in properly with the stone. Slide. And then I snapped this picture to give you a demonstration. You have two rollers typically on a project, your hot roller and your cold roller. The hot one is the heavier roller. This starts rolling soon after the mix is applied, and this is where you get about 90% of your compaction. It's up to the hot roller to really knock everything down and get it into your 3-inch lift. The cold roller then comes behind that after the surface temperature is around 200 or so, and that is purely, the cold roller is purely for the aesthetics part of it, really smoothing things out. You want your surface coat to be as smooth as possible because that primary function of that is to shed the water off of the road. Slide. And that is it. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Randy? Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
So then we move on to the next item, and that is a discussion of the crosswalk analysis. In the handout, in the agenda, there are two handouts that were attached to this, and I'll just turn it over back to you, Randy, to handle that discussion.
Dwayne will start us off here. He did a lot of the legwork for this project. We spent a lot of time in the field, and Steve then he did the traffic study, and the three of us basically, it was a collaborative effort, but I'll let Dwayne start.
Thanks, Randy. Dave, when you get a chance, we can start the PowerPoint, please. Thanks, Dave. From Main Street to the city limits are all uncontrolled. And you may ask, well, what does uncontrolled mean? It means there are no stop signs, no yield signs, no traffic lights, nothing that is stopping the vehicular traffic at any of the intersections along that route. Next slide, please. So typically, city staff doesn't recommend painting crosswalks on an uncontrolled intersection if can be helped. And so you'll notice it's one of the reasons why there's probably not crosswalks marked along Madison Street, because they're all uncontrolled. In situations where requested or where we've had this situation in the past, we've looked at rectangular rapid flashing beacons to help give visibility to the traveling vehicular traffic to see that there would potentially be, or that there is, a pedestrian in the crosswalk. So we use those at uncontrolled intersections to improve pedestrian safety. The city currently has 4 at Madison and College, Main and Water, Main and Milton, and Mulberry and Fargo. There is one proposed at the end of the TAP grant project. We are actually awaiting delivery on one that is on back order. The supply chain issue on that has caused some delay. We're hoping that that will still be put in this fall. That would be at the entrance of the Lake Mills Market on County Trunk Highway V. Next slide, please. These are just the 4 locations that exist. This is on South Main, was part of the Main Street project in 2019. Next slide, please. As well at Milton Street. Next slide. Fargo, I believe this one's a little older, Randy, about 8 years old, I believe. And the next slide was part of another topic like this that came forward from residents at the middle school, and to provide a crosswalk with an RFB at the intersection of College and Madison Street a number of years ago. Next slide, please. We also, the group staff looked at recommendations of when does an RFB, what are the criteria for using it? When does the state? So this is a state document, the State Traffic Engineering Operations and Safety Manual. When do you use RFBs? When should you be considering it? And there's a number of criteria. So the first one, locations uncontrolled pedestrian crossing, all the intersections on this route meet that. The next one is pedestrian traffic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in future slides. Third one is a minimum volume of 1,500, and I think I may have skipped over a slide, but I believe, or a slide disappeared. It's on the next slide. 2,200 to 2,400 average daily traffic on Madison Street, according to the DOT. So that is met. Maximum 4 lanes crossed. We're not beyond 4 lanes. And then minimum 300 feet to the nearest controlled intersection. That is not any of the areas, the intersections we're discussing are not within 300 feet. And then adequate stop sight distance. There are some concern on certain intersections along this route, but probably not the 2 that we're talking about. Next slide, please. I've already talked about the 2,200. And next slide. This, thanks to the Lake Mills Police Department staff, last week on September 4th and 5th in the PM and the AM, looked at 3 different intersections and counted traffic, pedestrian traffic at these sites. In the state traffic counts, in that if you go back 2 slides, don't have to, Dave, there is a, I'll reread that. You don't have to go back, Dave. 1 second. Yes, thanks, Drake. So you're looking for a minimum of, or at least 20 pedestrians. Young children, 12 and under, count as double, and elderly over 85 count as double. And so we're looking for an ultimate hourly count of over 20. In these cases, a 30-minute count, 2 students and 1 adult in the afternoon, or in the AM on the next day, 4 students and 3 adults. So the maximum projected hourly count is 12 in this case. This is at Prospect and Madison. I'll note that that's the current traffic count. It also does not have a crosswalk at this time at Prospect Street, but this is the count from the staff. Next slide, please.
I'd like to point out that was done during peak hours too, in the AM and in the PM when we expect student traffic.
And it was 1 sample?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It was 1 evening and the following
day.
morning, 1 day.
What what day of the week was that? Does it matter?
That was on Wednesday afternoon and
sure.
Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Weather was good, so weather would not have been a factor for walking to school.
So this is Pine Street, just to get the proximity to Prospect Street. Again, the count is similar. In the projected hourly is 10. Next slide, please. Then looking at Fremont Street, same scenario. The count is at 14. Next slide, please. This is just an aerial view of the Madison Street, Prospect Street intersection. This was one of the two that was brought up during the public comment last month. We'll note that the intersection doesn't have a crosswalk from east to west. And so this, no matter what type of crosswalk painting that would occur here, crosswalks, handicap ramps, and potentially sidewalk on either side to meet ADA requirements would have to be removed and replaced to install a crosswalk across this location. Next, go ahead.
And at this location,
Waters.
there's not a cross street, that's a driveway across from Prospect Street, correct?
Correct. The
So
driveway.
it's not a cross.
It's not perpendicular.
Okay.
And you are correct, that is a driveway to a residential property. We've looked at both sides of this. The grades would work better on the north side. However, I think we all agree that the pedestrian traffic flow, to minimize the amount of crossings of Prospect Street in the pedestrian flow, it would probably be better to put it on the south side if it is considered. Unfortunately, what happens is where you see that number 3 just on the drawing, that sidewalk is higher in grade, wouldn't meet ADA requirements, so we would have to remove some of the sidewalk between the two driveways, lower the grade down to provide a handicap ramp that's accessible in that area. So it's not just as simple as just placing the handicap ramp. Next slide, please. Gives you a little picture kind of side view. You can see where the hydrant is on the left side. You see how that sidewalk's a little higher than the curb. And because of the distance, it just doesn't meet ADA requirements. Next slide. We've looked at 3 options for this intersection. One is the RFB. Those prices have been going up over the years. We're projecting at about $15,000 for that RFB. So our OPCC, or our opinion of probable construction cost to do the full project, would be $23,000 at this intersection. That would be to install the RFB, the signs, the handicap ramps, the sidewalk, and the markings. Option 2 is to install the handicap ramps, the sidewalk, the markings, not install the RFB, and then look to use some type of flags or other methods to improve pedestrian safety. And then, of course, option 3 is always an option, is to maintain the existing condition, and that obviously is $0 cost. Next slide, please. This is the other intersection that was looked at through this process, and that was Fremont Street. Again, in this case, a little different. The handicap ramps are there. There is a handicap ramp on the north side of this intersection. Next slide, please. A little difficult to see, but you can see that there's a handicap ramp heading east to west. Next slide, please. This one's a little different on the RFB side of things. This is again from the same WSDOT Safety Operations Manual. And it recommends in that document, it says, historically, 1,200 feet has been a rule of thumb for minimum spacing between RFBs. Because if you have multiple RFBs, you start confusing the vehicular traffic, and they're seeing multiple flashing lights, and over time, they tend to potentially ignore those. So the DOT's recommendation is to space those at least 1,200 feet. Unfortunately, Prospect Street is less than 600, or about 600 feet from the College Street RFB that already exists.
Fremont?
Did I say Prospect?
Fremont and College.
Fremont and College are about 650 feet apart. My apologies. Next slide, please. Same 3 options. In this case, because the handicap ramps are already there, the price goes down, $18,000 for option 1, $3,000 for option 2, and of course, 0 for option 3. And I believe, Dave, is that the last slide? Thank you. Any questions, anything else anyone like to add from staff?
Well, we just wanted to point, with the Fremont intersection, both intersections, they do not meet DOT criteria justifying installing or constructing crosswalks. The board and the city can decide otherwise, but just based on the DOT criteria, it was not, well, they just did not meet the qualifications for it. Primarily the Fremont Street one because of its close proximity to an existing controlled crossing.
I think, and then in general, if the board and ultimately the council wants to proceed with installing crosswalks here, staff's general recommendation is to utilize the RFBs because they're at uncontrolled intersections in which motorists have not had a history of needing to expect pedestrian traffic in this area, and so when you're approaching these uncontrolled intersections, by putting in crosswalks, we are encouraging pedestrian traffic at these areas, and so we may create more pedestrian vehicular interactions and at uncontrolled intersections that can decrease the safety of that route.
Greg?
Can you discuss the use of flags? I was in Mount Horeb over the weekend and I noticed that they had flags at certain intersections, and I didn't know the effectiveness or anything about it, but I see that it's listed as one of the solutions.
So, go ahead if you would like to. Flags are used short of going to the RFB in some cases. It's a method that has been used in other communities, usually a bin full of flags with red flags or orange flags on a stick. And as the pedestrian comes to the intersection, they grab the flag to help announce to the vehicular traffic that they're coming in the crosswalk. And then when they cross, they drop it in the bucket on the opposite side that's connected to the post. Again, not to the level of safety as an RFB, but would be the next step down. Of course, MUTCD, or the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, doesn't say that you have to have the flags. We just added that and I think it was brought up during the discussion at the public comment last month, that would be potentially an option that has been used in other locations. Maybe one of the things that isn't mentioned is that a lot of times those flags disappear.
Right.
Over time. They get lost in the snow and the ice in the winter. And so there's no guarantee that those bins will be full all the time. Staff, any other comments with regard to that?
I have used them in previous municipalities with mixed results. They're normally popular right around school crossings, right around the school itself, where you'll have crossing guards. But Dwayne wisely points out that it is hard to maintain those flags.
So I have a question about the school zone signs. What is the criteria to install school zones? Is that, do you have to be a certain number of feet from the school? And are these two intersections that we're talking about, would they be considered in a school zone?
So I can't quote the specific feet for a school zone. A school zone generally is indicated by a street that abuts a school property. Okay. So Madison Street technically is not a school zone. What it is a school crossing. So the signage there is to indicate a school crossing, and the same speed limit restrictions of 15 miles per hour apply in an area of a school crossing as they do within a school zone. So the school zone for the middle school, for example, would be on College Street that fronts the school. The school crossing would be Madison Street. In that specific location, I believe the signage starts just south of Fremont Street if you're coming south or east. And it's right around Church Street, or just between Church and Main if you're heading west or north. So it's a pretty short school crossing area on Madison Street.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. White asked a question in the chat. I can read it. Are there any crosswalks north of Prospect before Tyranina Road?
Not that I'm aware of.
To my knowledge, no.
Well, that's a problem.
Not not marked. I will pull up aerial to see if there is a crosswalk at Pine.
Yeah, Pine would be the only intersection that crosses Madison Street.
Can I further?
Yes,
Ask a question?
Aaron, go ahead.
Just curious, I do live on Madison Street, so I do observe and I have paid attention the last couple of weeks. And there's a fair amount of traffic that happens walking across there at different times. And it just seems like north of College Avenue, there's really nowhere to cross all the way up to Tyranita Road. And there's just, no crosswalks there. So I'm curious because there is one downtown south of, what is that road there? Right by Water Street. So I'm just curious what the criteria is for something like that versus, that's within 1,200 feet of an actual crosswalk. So just kind of wanting to understand a little bit more about like that criteria.
So to your first question, I did confirm Pine Street does not have a handicap crossing. It does have a large driveway with a business similar to Prospect Street, directly across from the T intersection. And then to your second question, Mr. White, the crosswalk at Madison and Lake has been a crosswalk at the east end of the Commons for as long as I can remember. But you are correct, it currently does not have the signage, and that should be considered. The second crossing in an uncontrolled intersection on Lake Street is at Oak Street, which is near the business, the restaurant business at the corner of Oak and Lake. That one was painted and signs were installed a number of years ago to address the request for crosswalks in that area as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you. Was this really brought up as a school crossing issue or just a general crossing issue? Right. It seemed like it was brought up from concerned parent about school crossing, but what about just general?
I think school crossing was the driver of the request.
Yeah.
But I would like to point out that the activity center is right there on the corner of Fremont, and there are a number of people, including myself, that try to get to that and prefer not to cross the school traffic and intermix with middle schoolers at that time. So, and it is a very busy area full of traffic, both vehicular and pedestrian traffic right there by that school. It's kind of a nightmare. Sometimes the traffic's backed up way back. I mean, so I don't know. I'm for adding some sort of crossing that is not just that's, our RFB.
And I guess my take from a public safety standpoint, because of some of the things we talked about today, would be you have the handicap ramps on the north side of Fremont Street already accessible. If you're going to paint a crosswalk, would be to put crossing signs up, the fluorescent yellow crossing signs. An RFB, I think, would confuse drivers. So I would recommend against that because I think it may hurt more than it would help. But fluorescent signs with a marked crosswalk would be an option there, and that would be option 2. And at that location, since the ramps are already installed, it was a lower cost.
Right.
So I have a question. I know this kind of is a follow-up to what Nicole is saying. Really, we were talking about pedestrian crossings, but is there a need on Madison to have a controlled intersection? And that could help to alleviate some of this, and then you put your pedestrian crossings, you tie that in with a controlled intersection somewhere along Madison.
I would have to refer back to the manual to see what their standards are. Just in intersections that I've looked at in the past, I don't think you're going to meet the warrants to install a controlled intersection on Madison Street. Madison Street's a county highway. It's a main thoroughfare. The cross streets, most of them are only one direction.
Right.
Once you get north of Fremont. So I don't think you're going to meet the warrants to put any sort of traffic control along Madison Street.
Okay.
North of Main or west of Main.
Jason, do you have any
I
comments?
don't have anything.
Okay.
One more comment I'll make, if it's okay.
Yes,
As far as some kind of controlled crossing there, is that in watching the traffic on that road, there is a fair amount of semi-traffic coming off of around the north side of the lake, and it does seem like it's it can be pretty busy on that road with some big vehicles and big trucks. So I'm just questioning. Just that's why I asked the question about Tyranina Road all the way down to College. There's really nowhere to cross that's in any way marked. So that's not really a question, more of a comment, and just maybe saying that this require maybe just further discussion down the line as far as like now that we've understood what some of the criteria are and some of the drivers and the costs. I think that was more of a comment than just maybe this needs further discussion.
You are correct, but it did prompt me to say staff, of course, our first priority is safety and safety of the pedestrians. So understand when we put this together, we were looking at the RFB as, while it is more expensive, it is probably the safest way to cross an uncontrolled intersection, and know that staff, definitely was looking at that from a safety perspective as well, even though the warrants aren't showing that it's necessary. We did want to present that as one of the options.
So the criteria, if I'm summarizing this correctly, out of the 6 criteria, in order to install, the RF, what's the?
RRF.
RRFB. We meet 2 of the 6 criteria. Am I understanding that correct?
I would say we've met 5 of the 6. The only one would be the volume of pedestrians.
Oh, I thought we've only met 2 because of the first and the third criteria.
The first and the third, I really, there's only 2 lanes of traffic being crossed. There's 2 parking lanes as well. We are not within 300 feet of a controlled intersection, so that was met as well. Okay. And stop distances, there are a couple intersections that I would recommend that the sight distance is too short. In particular, I believe it is Pleasant Street and Marguerite, because of the hill and the curve. The sight distance would not be adequate for an RFB. Okay. But in the locations that we're talking about, Prospect or Fremont, the sight distances are much better.
Okay.
Unfortunately, item number 2, which is the volume, at least on the day that the police department counted pedestrian traffic, was lower than this warrant or this criteria.
Okay.
But we can go with the non-RRFB option and simply, especially at the one that already has the pedestrian ramps, paint the lines and put up the signage.
I'll add that you can then also consider if the pedestrian traffic increases over time, maybe those warrants are met in the future.
Is there ever a time where you start off with flags and then you escalate up to the other solutions?
If by creating, if the warrants, you put in the infrastructure, you make it a crosswalk, it's painted, you put signage up, people feel safer crossing there, it's possible that the pedestrian traffic then crosses and you meet that metric then sure, you could increase the robustness, I guess, of the safety of the intersection and install an RRFB at that time if you hit all of the criteria. So I'm sure there's examples that exist in municipalities across the state where it started as a lower level controlled pedestrian crossing and then upgraded as it became busier.
Okay.
I guess looking at this, it almost seems like a no-brainer to do a crosswalk at Fremont on the north side.
Yes.
As far as implementing flags or blinking lights probably seems like we're not quite meeting the criteria for that, but maybe we can evaluate and decide if flags is warranted down the road, or if we see more volume, maybe we need to look at the blinking lights in the future. But I am concerned, like you mentioned, it's only a short distance to the College Street location, which is a 2-minute walk probably to go down there, but then you would route a different way to get to the elementary school. If you took that effort, you'd go down to Main Street and then cut up north to the school. So
Yeah, a lot of families have said that they don't do it. They cross illegally, and they do it daily. I've seen them. There's one family in particular that has 4 children that she walks that route, and she doesn't go down to the RFB just because they're little kids and they don't want to walk any further out of their way. I like to go to the activity center. I like to cross on that intersection. It always felt weird that it was unmarked, even though it looks like it should be a pedestrian. And I don't see the drawback into signing and getting vehicles to slow down before they're hitting that actual pedestrian crosswalk, because they really should be aware that there are lots of children crossing.
I want to point out, speaking just for myself as director, we're not advocating one position or another here. We're just giving you the results of our study.
Yeah, no, I understand that. We
We like building things and more than glad to take on a project, so.
And I would add, as the person whose staff and I actually did the count in the afternoon at Fremont Street and in the morning at Prospect Street, and then I had an officer do those locations at the opposite times. I was liberal with my count in that half of the people who crossed were on bicycles. So kids biking to school with a parent or whatnot, so technically they're not pedestrians, but they were kids crossing the road. So I included them in those counts, figuring if they have to get across the road, I'm gonna count them as pedestrians crossing.
One more comment is, as part of the study on that, do you look at speeds on that road? Because it is downhill from Tyranny Road all the way down to College Avenue. And I see a fair amount of flashing lights at night there with vehicles pulled over. Is there ever a part of this study that goes into like speeds, average speeds on that road? Or can that be something that we look at as well to try to justify?
I certainly have the capability with one of our speed signs to capture speeds of traffic. However, the speed limit is the driving factor. I realize cars may go faster than it, but the speed limit is 25 miles an hour on that road, which is appropriate for a residential area. So that would be more of a driving factor to me than whether cars are speeding or not, I guess would be my response.
I would just note that just because you don't meet warrants and it's not justified by data does not mean you can't install something. I think warrants would certainly be, if something met warrants, you'd see staff bringing forward something to you to install. The lack of warrants is perhaps why nothing has been installed here in the past. But the city council does not need to justify its reasoning for putting something in. It is entitled to do as it would please at that intersection.
I would like to ask, does the city council have the money to do something like this?
Does Public Works have the money for something like this?
Right.
Do we have $3,000?
We can find $3,000 for that one. We would need, our RFBs, no, but $3,000 we will find a way.
There's lots of money in the police budget. So.
More if you start ticketing people speeding on that road.
It's all general fund revenue.
So I guess I would make a motion to recommend to City Council the addition of a crosswalk on the north side of the Fremont Street and Madison Street intersection.
I second.
Jason?
No, she seconded it.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
okay.
yeah,
You were
otherwise
gonna
I-
second.
No, I was gonna second, yeah.
I got it.
Got it.
So there's a motion on the table to recommend a crosswalk at the north side of Fremont at Madison Street, and it's been seconded. How about some discussion? Any further discussion on that? Aaron, do you have some discussion at all to add?
No, I think it's been great. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So if there's no further discussion, we would.
Staff had,
Oh, staff,
quick
I'm
comment.
sorry. Dwayne?
If you would like clarification, or should we have clarification, should we state with which option at that intersection? I'm
I just
assuming.
was saying the crosswalk, if somebody wants to add flags, they'd have to amend the motion.
Oh. My apologies, I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you.
You bet.
I guess I'm new to the flag thing. Are they very effective? I mean, do you think, Chief?
You can always add flags down the road.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we start and
just start with this.
Yeah.
let's see
To
how it
answer the
goes.
question, it would be anecdotal, so I
Honestly,
don't
I've
have any
never
data
even
that would
noticed that they
indicate
were
one way or
there.
another.
So there's a motion that's been moved and approved and seconded to add a crosswalk at Fremont and Madison Street. And did I hear the north side?
Yes.
Or on the north side. And is there any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, I would ask the clerk to take the roll. A roll vote?
Mr. White,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Ms. Wagner,
Aye.
Mr. Shearer,
I,
Mr. Polachek.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. Then we move on to the next item. And that is recommendations for future agendas. Hearing none, we move to the next one, which is adjournment. This meeting has been adjourned before 7 o'clock,
As
which is
requested.
what you wanted.
Thank you.
Thank you.